Welcome everyone. My name is Chris Kerrigan with the Vermont Chamber of Commerce. I'd like to welcome everyone to the Vermont Chamber of Commerce webinar series. This webinar is underwritten and sponsored by the University of Vermont. Today our webinar is titled 5 Best Practices for Project Management in Your Business by the University of Vermont, and we have with us today Jen Minkar of Minkar Consulting. Before we begin, a couple of housekeeping updates. Everyone who has registered for this webinar will receive a copy of today's webinar presentation in Adobe PDF format. As an attendee, you must enter your audio PIN number, as this is a recorded webinar and will be available for download after the webinar. For questions and answers, which will be handled at the end of the presentation, please submit your questions online or raise your virtual hand on your webinar console to be unmuted and recognized. You may then ask your question. Q&A, for the record, will not be recorded. And without much further ado, it's now my pleasure to introduce Jen. Jen, welcome. The floor is yours.
Hi. Thanks, Chris, for having me here today. A bit about me before we get started in the material. I own a local Vermont-based project management consulting company. I specialize in IT project management. I also provide training in project management. So I spend about half my days managing projects and half my days in the classroom. It's really a good mix of project management theory and time spent managing projects. I also own a company here in Burlington called Office Squared. It's Vermont's first co-working space, a space where small business owners and consultants can come together as a community to work as an alternative to working alone at home. Prior to owning these businesses, I was a global IT director at Burton Snowboards and also worked at IBM in software development for a number of years. What really this has all given me is a lot of experience in all parts of project management, from team member to project manager to project sponsor. I've managed small teams, 3-person teams, to very large 200-person international teams, short 3-week projects to very long 3-year projects. I've really seen it all. Project management is a huge, expansive field, but what I'm going to do today is really boil it down to what I feel are the 5 best practices that your business should use for all of the projects that you undertake. Before I get into those 5 best practices, I want to show you a bit of research that I did. I took a look at what makes business leaders successful and what really makes projects successful. On the left is the result of a study that I looked into that shows the 6 characteristics of successful business leaders. And I highlighted a couple of words there. Future-focused. Small business owners really thrive at doing short and long-term planning, planning being the key word there. They're really collaborative. They look to delegate work and build strong relationships with people, and they're very action-oriented. They're proactive and they manage issues. And then projects really succeed when they do all those things, but the things I want to highlight here are things like having clear business objectives, looking at using skilled resources, putting a good team together, and then having somewhat of a formal methodology and tracking progress. The items that I highlighted really directly coincide with the 5 key best project management practices that I've found that I want to share with you today and the experiences that I've had managing projects. So what are those 5? Here are the 5 that we're going to talk about today. The first one is clear and documented being important here, business objectives. Second thing that we're going to go through is to have a plan or a schedule for your project or your business. The third thing is that you should gather a team, and not just any team, but a skilled and an excited team. The fourth thing that we'll discuss is really managing your issues and risks. Keyword there being managing. And then the last thing is to track and also communicate your progress along the way. So really, whether you're starting a project, starting a business, big or small, at a bare minimum, these are really the 5 must-dos from a project management perspective. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk through each of these in a little more detail, and then I'm going to actually show you examples of business project charters, of schedules, and of status reports that I've used in the past, and then we'll wrap it up. Before I start, I just want to run through 2 definitions so that we're all on the same page, so that you can clearly understand, A, what a project is, and really by definition a project is a temporary endeavor undertaken to create a unique product or service, and I underlined 2 words there. The first is that a project is temporary. It should have a clear beginning and end. And a lot of times projects get off to a clear start, but they don't have always a clear ending. You want to make sure that, before you launch into something, it has a very clear end to it, and that you're creating something very unique. So, whether you're building a website, launching a campaign, or even just starting a business, really that falls under the premise of having a project and going into some sort of project management process. So once you know that you do have, in fact, a project in front of you, then you can start using project management and the 5 things that we're going to talk about today. So project management is really applying the knowledge, tools, and processes to meet your project requirements. And the key word here is project requirements. You need to make sure that you understand what the project requirements or objectives are that you're trying to achieve. So we know what projects are, we know what project management is. Let's start with the very first key business best practice that you should do for project management. And that is to have clear business objectives. When you start a business or start your project, the first important task is to make sure that you have a business objective. Now, sometimes in a business, it's called a business plan, and you may say, I have a business, I didn't have a business plan, and maybe it worked out okay for you. But in project management, it's important to have a very clear understanding of what you're trying to create. And the reason that we think that it's important to do that is because the act of documenting this really helps to bring clarity to what you're trying to deliver. A lot of times I've worked with a lot of companies and worked on projects where you may have a discussion with somebody and you think you understand what you're trying to achieve. You're trying to build a blue box, and you both think in your mind you have an idea what a blue box looks like, but you walk away and one person thinks the box is going to be 12 inches and the other person thinks the box is going to be 2 feet big. And if you didn't document that and clearly write down what you think you're achieving, you might not have clarity around that. So we also think that it's worthwhile to document what your objectives are going to be. So bringing clarity and conciseness to the business idea and making sure that you document and have complete agreement on it is why it's important to have clear business objectives documented. A lot of times we use the acronym SMART, S-M-A-R-T. When you're building business objectives, SMART stands for specific, M stands for measurable, A stands for agreed upon, R stands for realistic, and T stands for making sure it has some sort of time element to it. So when you're doing your business objectives, just make sure that they're SMART. When you start your project, you should always make sure when you're initiating you have some sort of business project charter. A lot of times you might hear this called like a project brief, scope document, business plan, but this is something that it should look something like this. This is a project charter that we could use to say a company is building a workout room, an additional workout room in their company. And you can see here for the project objective, rather than just saying we're going to create a workout room for this company, which is one of the first lines, we say it's going to be for under $1 million by June 1st. But we also want to have some business objectives in there. So it's not just a goal to build a room. There's reasons why we're going to do this for the company, and some of that is so that we're going to improve job satisfaction by 25%. A lot of times I work with companies and they say, yeah, we're going to do this because we want to make our employees happy. And I say, well, how are you going to measure that? They say, I don't know. You can walk around and look at the smiles on their face and use that as your way of measuring things. So sometimes you even have to start by creating a baseline measurement and measuring employee satisfaction to start with, and then doing a survey later and saying, are you happier now that we have a workout room in place? So doing things like improving job satisfaction, knowing what it is today, and then measuring it after is something you can put as a baseline measurement for your project objectives. Having milestones in there, key resources identified, and assumptions and risks are also things that can be included in your project charter. But things like that that are listed there as project objectives are the things that we're talking about. The next thing that you should make sure as a key best practice is having a plan or having a schedule. This is something you can do with your team. There's a lot of techniques to use to build your schedule, one of which in project management terms we call a WBS, or work breakdown structure session, where you break down the project into deliverables or more manageable pieces. You put together a schedule. I emphasize the word plan here because it really is just that. I know in business things change a lot. A lot of times people just get to work when they start a project. They don't want to put a plan together. But really a plan is important because it helps you, A, create milestones for yourself, but it also is important because it helps you find out as soon as possible whether you're running behind. So rather than getting to the end of the project and saying, whoops, looks like we're going to be late, it helps you determine as soon as possible whether you think you might be running behind. There's a lot of different tools out there for helping to build a project schedule. Things like Microsoft Project, AtTask, Basecamp, those are all kinds of scheduling tools you may have heard of. But you can also use Microsoft Excel to help build your schedules as well. And that's what I've used here in this example. And if we continue the example of the workout room, you can see here that we've got the task names on the left-hand side there. We're going to build a workout room. Further down, we're going to purchase some equipment for the room. We're going to create a schedule for the classes we're going to offer in the room, and I'm just moving down. And then we have durations of how long in weeks each of those tasks are going to take, when we're planning to start it, and when we're planning to end it, and then who's responsible for it. And you can have your plans or schedules look just like this. It's relatively high level. It's pretty simple to put together. In this case, I would work with Joe and Jack and Jane to put this together as a team, lay it out, and then we can plug along, and then we can start executing. Having a schedule like this is really important because then I would know if I didn't start the design of that room, that third task, by January 15th, then I would know that we're probably going to start to have issues. I want to know that as soon as possible. I don't want to wait till February to know that if we haven't even started designing the room, then we've got some challenges. The third best practice is gather a great team. If you've ever read the book Good to Great, you know that getting the right people on the bus at the start of the project is really important. Making sure that your team members understand what the roles are, why they were brought onto the team. And one of the most important things that I've really found as a project leader over the past few years is that you want to make sure they're really excited about the project and about the business. Sometimes, just because they're the best programmer or the best engineer, it doesn't mean that they're the absolute best person for your team or for that role. Making sure that they're just as enthusiastic about the project as you are can sometimes make up for some of the skills that they may be lacking. If they're willing to learn, that sometimes can make them a great team member. So making sure that you've gathered a great team is really important as a project management best practice. You can lay out your team in some form that looks like this. But if you have your plan, you can also then identify if you're missing any team members. And so you can start to see that in project management, one of the beauties of project management is that things start to build on each other. It's hard to build a team if you don't know what people have to do. So in this case, we know that, well, we do need somebody from facilities and marketing and HR and our vendor and also finance. And we know that because we build out a plan. And we know that because we've had a charter that laid out what we're trying to do. The fourth best practice is to identify issues and risks. Not just identify them, but also to manage them. The benefits of this can really be huge. A lot of times when I work with people, people think that risks are bad. Risks aren't always just bad. Risks can be good. You can actually gain a lot of money if you were to identify and take action on risks in business. However, to ignore risks and issues can really be costly, sometimes even catastrophic in business. If you ignore a business issue, something like customer dissatisfaction seems to be increasing, that could actually eventually lose revenue and eventually lose your business. This is a chart that we use in project management a lot, that throughout the life cycle of a project, the risks, the number of risks are highest. So if you look at the upper left-hand side, the number of risks are highest at the beginning of a project, but the amount at stake is lower. And then the reverse is true at the end of the project as we come to an end. So if you ignore, risks, it could be pretty catastrophic at the end because the amount at stake is very high at the end. So, the key word here is management, not ignorance or avoidance. Don't stick your head in the sand if things start happening. The key thing here is proactive. If you're working with a team of people, one of the easiest things to do, you don't have to take it on yourself as a business leader, business owner, or team leader. One of the easiest things to do as a team leader is to just ask. Do you guys see any issues? Do you know of any risks? Just asking that question in your team meetings can make the difference between risks popping up unexpectedly or managing risks effectively. The last best practice that I've identified is to track and communicate your progress. This is really all about communicating where you're at and how you're doing and actually reporting on it periodically. If you're working for other people or in a company with a board of directors, this is probably pretty obvious. You can actually do status reports, and maybe it's even expected of you, and report to your management team or your stakeholders. Sometimes I work with people that are like, well, I own my own business. Like, who am I going to report to? Myself. And I say, yeah, maybe you should. Maybe you should have some clear measurements that you want to track and look at those things and print out a report for yourself. Or maybe you should have some trusted people that you can talk to and meet with, or family members or somebody to actually report to. But tracking and communicating progress is absolutely one of the things, a best practice in project management. I put an example here to carry through and finish up our workout room example. They don't have to be long. We're not talking about minutes from a meeting or a bunch of paragraphs as status for a project or a business. Most of the time, status reports should be short, concise, and should have 4 basic elements of them. You'll recognize the milestones. They're the same milestones from the project charter, and this is why I say project management really builds on itself. Those milestones are the same. We're just tracking the progress through them. The accomplishments section shows you what you've done up to this point. If there are any new exposures or risks, you'll see in this case we're having an issue with the purchasing and delivery of equipment with the XYZ spinning company, but it looks like we've got things under control. We're going to seek out a new supplier. And then you look at, and this is probably the most important part of the status report, is what's coming up next. And really you want to start to be proactive. Project management is really all about being proactive and not reactive. So it gives you an opportunity to really keep looking ahead the next week or two out and see what's coming, not just reacting to what should have been last week or the week before that. One thing about project management is it's really all about getting better and better. The Kerzner maturity model is the way in project management that we manage how you're doing. I work with a lot of companies and look at, are you using common language, common processes? The idea here is, did you want to move from a level 1 up to a level 5 company eventually, where you've got some common processes in place and you move to continuous improvement? What we found is that those companies that continue to move up the Kerzner maturity model tend to have more success. So, as you start getting your processes documented, as you're building charters and plans and status and communicating status, that is moving you toward common processes, singular methodology, and that'll start you to move further up the maturity model, further toward success. Unfortunately, if you look at some of the other research that shows that the Spanish group does some research on, and it's IT projects, but I think it's projects in general, that 46% of projects come in over budget, 28% fail altogether, and what this means is that only about a quarter of projects undertaken are considered successful. That doesn't sound very optimistic. The optimistic part of this chart is that those rates really improve with the implementation of project management practices. And I've definitely seen that happen, that these simple things, like these 5 best practices, if you just put charters in place, schedules in place, gather a good team, manage your issues and risks, and do some sort of communication of your status, that is better project management, and that will lead to greater success in your projects or in your business. And that's what we have here, the 5 best practices. Business objectives: have a schedule, gather your team, issue and risk management, status, and progress reporting. Any of these templates that I showed there, the charter plan and status reports, are all available. You can contact me. They're all available for free. We also have a series of project management classes and a certificate program available that we're starting at UVM. Heather's sitting here too from UVM. So we're starting that at UVM this summer. Everything that I talked about here too, if anybody's familiar with the PMI organization, all of this information is also based right out of the Project Management Institute, Project Management standards. So there's nothing, this isn't Jen Minkar's processes. This is something that Project Management Institute sanctions and recommends as well. I just put it in my own terms. So, so that's what I have today.